A fierce battle was taking place at the walls of the magnificent palace, and bloody people were lying everywhere on the ground. A blood-spattered man told his wife he was not like her ex-husbands. His wife Agatha looked up and asked her husband if he was still with her, because he needed her, or just because she was nobilis. The man swore foully. The main character asked with surprise and horror what he said. In response, the husband said that he would take advantage of the moment and condemn her family. The girl's large eyes reflected pain and despair. The husband ordered Agatha to lower the dagger and approach him so as not to make people worry. The Nobilis family was the heart of the Roxbad Empire. They held untold wealth and power in their hands, and the name of the house resounded far beyond the borders of the empire. Agatha Nobilis was the sole heir of this house. At the age of 5, the girl became an orphan, and, by the will of her godfather, the emperor, became the wife of Duke Progus, who was 30 years her senior. The Duke confessed to his friend that he married Agatha 10 years before she came of age for convenience, because this girl was a gold mine. But a vile knife attack in a gambling house left the Duke crippled, and the marriage fell apart. When the main character turned 10 years old, the emperor married her to the second prince of the Menukor Empire, hoping to gain the throne of Menukor. The prince's name was Ferdinand Menucanti. He was young and handsome, but depraved to the extreme, and later it became known that he had illegitimate children. Agatha asked for a divorce when she was only 13, and that marriage also fell apart. Soon the emperor took a liking to the new port and started another war. This time, the girl married the best knight of the empire, George Portas, but he was literally tormented by complexes about his appearance. The man was in constant conflict with Agatha, and after the defeat in the war, they divorced. Having come of age and inherited all rights at 16, the main character declared to the emperor that she would now choose her husband herself. The emperor allowed Agatha to do as she saw fit, but given the importance of the House of Nobilis, he reserved the right to intervene if necessary. However, as soon as the emperor's protection weakened, relatives who wanted to seize power tried to eliminate the girl. Agatha was forced to urgently look for a new husband. Her first husband, whom she chose herself, Henry Insidio, was affectionate and courteous. But in reality, he only wanted to have a child from Agatha in order to become the guardian of the heir of the Nobilis family and live like a king. Having realized this, the girl left Henry. The fifth husband, Leonard Shingeri, was supposed to become a sword for the heroine. Their family life seemed smooth and calm, but the man was found to have congenital impotence, which meant a fatal problem for the dynasty, since he could not have children. The enraged emperor demanded an immediate divorce so that the inheritance would not fall into the wrong hands. Then, for the first time, Agatha seriously considered choosing the one who already had everything. In that case, at least they wouldn't kill her. The girl married the young heir Theodore Newt, whose family was famous for its knights and impeccable manners. But even with him, there were some cracks. Some time ago at the residence of Duke Nuta, Agatha entered her husband's room and furiously exclaimed that Theodore must immediately send his grandmother, mother, and sister out of the house. The guy was confused, but his wife demanded an immediate answer. The Duke said he was confused by such a sudden request, as they had coped with it before. Agatha exclaimed that she had put up with the Nuta family's antics for a long time, but now she had decided that she had had enough. Theodore's relatives constantly picked on the main character, including because of her past. In fact, they simply did not want to divide the ancestral lands, and for them, the girl remained a daughter-in-law with a stain. Agatha's patience was not endless. She demanded that her husband's relatives be sent away. The Duke still hesitated, hoping for a compromise. Then the girl suggested a divorce, and that was how her sixth marriage ended. 2 months later, Agatha was drinking tea with the ladies of the court at her mansion when she was told about Enoch Eratus. The young head of the Arata house was the hero of the recent parade. At 20 years old, he suppressed the war and became a living legend of the continent. It was rumored that, after returning from the front, the young man staged a purge and drove out all his relatives. Agatha noticed that Marquis Arata had intervened at the right time, covering up the failure of her third husband and diverting attention from the latest divorce. The ladies called Lady Nobilis stern, supposedly as a joke, but it sounded quite serious. At the table, they discussed the difficult financial situation of the Arata house, since the relatives had squandered all their money while the head of the family was fighting. The ladies suggested that Agatha take Enoch Arat as her bodyguard, noting that his only close relative was his younger sister and that his servants were mostly war veterans. The lady reflected on the fact that the Marquis was young. There were no elders in his house, which meant there would be no snobbery. Usually, old houses like Areta are built on honor and glory, but now the Marquis's family is in a special situation. With its budget, it can last no more than a month. In the absence of her husband, the girl needed an order of knights for protection, and she agreed to consider the option of a noble house. Arata's residence sparkled with its splendor. A young man ran into the front hall with a bundle in his hand and called out to the head of the family. The Marquis turned around, beads of sweat running down his face. A servant named Conrad reported that Agatha Nobilis was asking the House of Areta to take her under their protection. Conrad reminded that the funds in the house treasury would barely last a couple of weeks. The servant tearfully begged his master to agree to this proposal, but the boy was adamant. At this time, the Marquis's secretary Ben approached and handed Enoch a folder with documents. Conrad was very upset that the Marquis already knew about Nobilis's proposal, but still remained silent. The documents Ben brought contained a report on all of Agatha's ex-husbands. Young Arata was amazed that the girl with the right of inheritance managed to divorce 6 times. Ben reminded that Agatha's godfather was the emperor himself, and the crown prince was her 6th cousin. Enoch reflected on the fact that the high-born girl was only 3 years older than him. That is, she was 23. The boy lost his parents at the age of 13 and was thrown into the war. Since then, the lady has already been in 2 marriages of convenience. The Marquis asked if Nobilis had enemies. Ben replied that they always did. The secretary reported that only Agatha remained in the direct line of succession, which is why the emperor is so concerned about who will inherit the name and power of the noble house. According to imperial laws, if a woman from a direct line lives, her child inherits everything, and the lateral branches are left with nothing. Enoch understood that only the head of the family could call the knights and restore order, and while the girl was alone, the sidelines would weave intrigues. The guy said that there was no need to rush with security, since there was no point in expecting military might from the nobilis. Conrad submitted a financial report to the gentleman, the conclusion of which stated that the situation was critical. Enoch Arata felt very tired, because since the young man was taken to war, he had not had a single day of rest. The Marquis ordered Ben to find out what Lady Nobilis was after. Meanwhile, Lady Agatha arrived at the Crown Prince's palace. She was informed that the prince was resting in his chambers. The girl was not surprised, and resolutely proceeded to the bedchamber. With a loud scream and a push, she woke up the Crown Prince. Prince Anthony, half asleep, did not understand who had disturbed him. Agatha announced that she needed His Highness's help. The prince was unhappy that he was awakened. He did not like being disturbed in his sleep. The girl sternly ordered the young man to wake up properly and go out into the garden, where she would be waiting for him. After some time, Anthony appeared in the garden and asked what was the matter. Agatha suggested that he go hunting. The prince asked if Marquis Arata had agreed to become the girl's bodyguard. The lady answered in the affirmative and added that she wanted to test her new defender in action, for which she required the assistance of His Highness. The young man squinted slyly and asked what he would receive in return. Agatha promised her brother a stallion, which he had been eyeing for a long time, and the prince was simply happy. After sending the invitations, Anthony asked how many more times his sister planned to get married. Agatha replied that there was not a single worthy husband around. The girl added that she had not yet decided whether young Arata would become the 7th suitor for marriage. Security was her top priority right now. The lady asked to give her a couple of knights from the palace guard so that she could safely get home and not fall into an ambush. The prince provided his sister with security and said that she could do as she wished. Late in the evening, Agatha was given a letter from the crown prince. The message said that the hunt would take place in 3 days, and in the postscript, the brother asked if the girl was still alive. Agatha looked out the window sadly and sighed. In response, she wrote that she was alive thanks to the prince's care. On the day of the hunt, Lady Nobilis rode on horseback, accompanied by her retinue. She was informed that His Highness had already left the castle, but Marquis Arata had not yet left. The heroine realized that Anthony liked the horse he had given her. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, the girl noticed something strange in the thicket of the forest. The next moment, something hit the head of the knight riding next to her. Another knight shouted out a command to stand in battle formation and protect the lady from attack. The man shouted to Agatha that there were too many opponents. The girl understood that she had to break through, now or never. The retinue of the attacked rushed forward with all their might. The enemy commander ordered to open fire. One of the lady's defenders realized that it was a trap and ordered a stop. The sudden stop caused Agatha Nobilis to lose her balance and fall out of the saddle. The knights saw the girl fall and became worried. The main character's face was covered in blood, but she said that everything was fine so as not to distract the men. The main attacker shouted that their only target was the girl. The entire retinue was determined to protect their mistress. Agatha saw that there were 5 or 6 attackers for every one of her defenders. The battle was desperate. The people of Nobilis did not know if anyone would come to their aid in time. Lady Nobilis clutched her blade, hoping that His Highness would come to her aid. The leader of the attackers again ordered not to waste time on the knights, since their target was a woman. The girl wondered if the crown prince would notice all this. Suddenly, she realized that her brother would never know, because this was a perfectly planned trap. The relatives dared to attack the heiress right on the imperial estates, risking the wrath of the head of state. Agatha didn't know if she would be able to escape the trap alive. And then she saw the enemy aiming a bow straight at her. But the next second, the offender fell, struck by an arrow. The surprised lady turned around to see who her savior was. She saw knights riding, with the flag of the Arata clan flying above them. The young marquise, riding at the head, ordered preparations for battle. Frightened by the appearance of Arata's knights, the enemies rushed to retreat. Agatha realized that the attackers were in such a hurry to deal with her because they were afraid of meeting Enoch. The Marquis leaned over to the girl and asked if she was safe. The guy introduced himself and then threw his cloak over the shoulders of the wounded lady. The main character thought about how her face looked now and whether her voice was trembling. The young man placed Agatha on the horse in front of him, and the knights rode off to meet the prince. When the tension subsided, pain hit the girl in a wave. Enoch Arata carefully adjusted the cloak on the lady's shoulder and said that they were almost there. At this time, the crown prince emerged from the forest and shouted his sister's name. The man was furious that unknown persons dared to attack a noblewoman under the protection of his order. The prince was reminded that Agatha Nobilis's wounds needed to be attended to first, and he gave the order to prepare transport. Anthony was soon informed that his sister's life was not in danger, but her entire body was covered in bruises, so she would need at least 2 weeks of rest. The prince was glad that everything ended this way, and not much worse, and Agatha agreed with him. His Highness told the girl to rest, but she made an effort and stood up. The lady wanted to discuss the matter with the bodyguard when the hunt was over. The main character called out to Milord Marquis. The young man rode up to the carriage and asked why the girl had called him. He told Agatha that she needed to recover first. The man promised to wait for news from Lady Nobilis. The emperor was furious when he learned of the attack that had taken place in the capital itself. One of the advisors said that the culprits must be rooted out and taught a lesson. Another advisor was also outraged by the attack on a noblewoman under the protection of the court. The enraged emperor ordered severe punishment for all those involved in this matter. He summoned the Minister of War and the Chief of Intelligence, ordering them to find the killer's lair. Both ministers obeyed the order. The head of state thought about the fact that he did not allow Agatha to divorce, fearing for her life. He asked the crown prince if Lady Nobilis was thinking about a new marriage. The young man replied that only 2 months had passed since the last divorce, and it was unlikely that the girl had already found someone else. Anthony realized that since his father was talking about this, it meant that he was once again going to choose a husband for his goddaughter himself. The emperor confirmed his guess, saying that he would personally look for a worthy match for Nobilis. The son tried to object that the lady would make her own choice when the time came, but the head of the empire responded that the situation was currently too alarming and he had the right to help. Marquis Arata, who stood next to the prince, watched the scene closely. The boy realized that the emperor was only concerned with political calculations, but his son was truly not indifferent to Agatha. If the ruler truly valued his goddaughter, he would not have started talking about her marriage when the girl was barely alive. The fragile and refined lady turned out to be much bolder than she looked. The emperor released the heir and appointed the marquis a reward of 3,000 gold pieces. Enoch thanked the ruler for his generosity. All the ladies of the court looked at the young man passing by them and whispered to each other. Leon Tacrane, commander of the First Order of the Knights of Arata, approached the Marquise. The gentleman reported that he was fine, and the knights were returning home immediately. Leon understood that the Marquise had become the savior of Lady Nobilis herself, and his name would once again thunder throughout the empire. Agatha enjoyed tea in her mansion. Prince Anthony asked if she was ready to go out into the courtyard. The girl said that she had made an appointment with the Marquise of Arata. The lady added that there was no time to waste if she wanted to get married on her own terms. The prince said that he was already drawing up a list of suitors on his father's orders, which did not surprise Agatha. As a result of the war, the empire gained a port and new lands, and now everyone was chasing trade routes. The main character understood that in order to establish relations with the eastern continent, an island was needed as a support point. Anthony noted that it was necessary to take a closer look at the nobility with lands in that region and offer them something equivalent. Lady Nobilis promised to inform her brother when her list of candidates became final. The prince was curious about who Agatha had her eye on this time, but the girl still had no answer. She remembered the beautiful young face of her savior. It seems she liked the man. The crown prince guessed that his sister had someone after her heart, but the lady remained silent. Not wanting to share her feelings, the prince was slightly offended and promised not to interfere, but only to hand over the list of suitors when it was ready. Agatha said that was enough for her and gave the letter to the maid. Before making a decision, the girl wanted to be sure. At this moment, the valet entered and announced that the lady's invited guest had arrived. The guest was invited, and he entered the hall. The heroine suspected that her feeling was just an echo of fear after the attack. The prince said goodbye to his sister and asked her to take care of herself. Agatha saw Enoch Aratus in a ceremonial uniform with a glittering order on his chest. The guy came closer and kissed the lady's hand. Then he thanked the girl for the invitation. Agatha didn't know if it could be called a fleeting flash of feeling. The lady announced that she had invited the Marquise to thank him in her own way. The young man picked up the document and saw that it was an interest-free loan for 100,000 gold coins, as well as the right to buy local goods at a favorable price and supply government goods at a fair price. The main character asked to let her know if anything else was needed. The Marquis said that this was already more than he deserved. Agatha Nobilis asked him if he thought her life was worth less. Enoch was confused when he realized the meaning of her words. The lady also said that this was compensation for not being able to hire the Order of Arata. In response to the young man's surprise, the heroine announced that she was getting married. She mentally added that young Arata was one of the candidates. Agatha wanted to propose to the man, but she was afraid that he was not interested in marriage because he was only 20 years old. Suddenly, the girl's godfather, His Majesty Emperor Formili II, entered the hall. The lady frowned because the visit took place faster than she expected. The emperor inquired about his goddaughter's well-being. Agatha thanked him for his attention and said that she felt much better. Whatever the case, he really does care. The ruler of the empire reported that the attackers had already been executed, and those of the nobility who stood behind them had been arrested. Then the godfather got to the point and asked how the girl felt about a new marriage. Lady Nobilis replied that it was too early to talk about it, but the emperor insisted. Then the heroine, with a sweet smile, asked if there was already a candidate for her hand. Vormalai II responded briskly that he had already selected several suitable ones and that a meeting could be arranged right now. Agatha reminded him that her godfather had promised her freedom in choosing her marriage, and he was embarrassed. The man said that the current situation requires the heroine to have her own order of knights for protection. The girl agreed with this remark, but wanted to choose a husband herself. She asked to be given time to choose a worthy husband and introduce him to the court. The ruler was upset, but he expected such an answer. Vormalai allowed his goddaughter to act as she wished, but only on the condition that he liked the choice of groom. Agatha meekly promised to make every effort. After this, the emperor left. The lady was once again left alone with the Marquise of Arata. The girl suggested that the guy return to the conversation they had started. The Marquis took the papers and promised to study everything carefully. The heroine was upset that he was leaving so quickly. The young man ran his hand over Lady Agatha's face. He noticed that the girl looked very pale and asked permission to take her inside. The young man was as calm as he had been on the day of the hunt. The lady remembered how Enoch had thrown his cloak over her shoulders, and this short gesture shook her soul like a gust of wind. The memory sent a sudden, heart-wrenching wave of warmth through the girl, and it was pleasant. Marquis Arata returned to his mansion. Conrad has already brought the gentleman the necessary documents. Enoch hoped he was mistaken in his thoughts, but the servant did not please the Marquise by giving him letters of recommendation from ladies wishing to marry the young man. The young man thought that the war was not easy, but the sword was much simpler than all these worries that weighed on him like a burden. He imagined what it was like for Agatha to live, standing at the epicenter of power. Each meeting with the girl seemed to open a new page for Enoch. The heiress nobilis looked fragile, but she was strong to the core, and her softness was captivating. Perhaps this made her seem even more vulnerable. The Marquis asked if Ben had found out what he had asked him to do. Ben replied that, as expected, Arata's relatives were already trying to get to the houses from which the letters had come. As Enoch had thought, while he was away fighting, those who remained in the house were not idle. The Marquis said that this needed to be nipped in the bud before it took root. Ben replied that he was already getting names. Suddenly, the young man said, "Maybe he just needs to get married." The secretary was very surprised by this statement. The head of the house said that he was ready for marriage if it would stop what was happening. Enoch Arata had considered a political marriage before, but he needed someone who would not be led astray by the temptations of his family. Whatever hands reach out to her spouse, she should not feel the need to grab them. The young man caught himself thinking about Agatha. Lady Nobilis was the best choice, but Arata doubted that the girl would choose him. Conrad entered and announced that the Marquis's vassals had already gathered. The young man asked Ben to select candidates for a political union and left. The official presented Agatha Nobilis with a list of suitors from the Crown Prince. The list included Duke Jude of Sisherville, who had several mistresses and a passion for gambling. The girl definitely wouldn't have married this guy, but he was on the list for one important reason. The Duke owned the nearest convenient island, which the Empire needed for access to a new port in the east. There is another suitable island, but it borders the waters of the Mainukor Empire. This means that we will have to conduct naval negotiations with Mainukor. Agatha had no choice but to agree to negotiations. The official asked how Prince Fernand would react, but the lady forbade him to pronounce that name. The young man asked for forgiveness. In her marriage to Ferdinand, due to her husband's constant intrigues, Agatha's broken heart was the subject of ridicule at court. This could be used as an opportunity to negotiate, which is why the emperor entrusted this matter to the main character. The lady instructed the official to find out Mainukor's conditions for negotiations. The girl took another list of candidates, which was prepared separately. The document stated that Marquis Enoch Arata does not visit gambling houses, does not have love affairs, and was not involved in violence. But the heroine doubted that the young man, who had recently returned from the war, would want to enter into a political marriage. At that moment, the ladies were informed of the Marquise's arrival. A proud and handsome young man entered the hall. Agatha invited the guy to sit down and made some tea. But Enoch continued to stand and silently look at the girl. Finally, he asked if the lady prepared the treats herself. The guy stood so close that the heroine could hear his breathing. The girl said that she was engaged in the treat business to take a break from work. The young man came closer and kissed Agatha's hand, which embarrassed her a little. The heroine asked if rose tea would be suitable, and the young man replied that he was unpretentious. The guy volunteered to carry a tray of cakes to the table to help, but when he approached, he noticed a document with his name on the table. Agatha saw the young man stop and did not understand what was going on. Then she remembered that she had forgotten to hide the dossier on the Marquise. The girl felt awkward, but Enoch said nothing about the document he had seen. His impassive face betrayed no emotion at all. Finally, the guy asked if this was the list of suitors for the 7th time, and the girl answered in the affirmative. The lady said that she checked in advance some things that she did not tolerate in marriage, and asked if the Marquise was offended. He replied that he had also been collecting information, so they were accounted for. Agatha said that she knew about the letters arriving at Arata's residence. The young man admitted that he had not intended to get married, but the events of recent days had changed everything. The lady was surprised, because she had never heard anything about Arata's house. Suddenly, the guy asked if the heroine would marry him. She was taken aback by the question. The Marquis said that Agatha suited him in every way, but he was afraid that the noble lady would not agree to marry him. The young man asked that this marriage be considered without pressure. The girl thought that she couldn't miss the chance to be with Enoch, even if it was a political union. The main character was glad that the head of Arata also wanted to be with her, and she agreed. The Marquise was surprised by such a quick answer and asked if the lady was sure of her choice. The heroine pointed out the guy's name in the file. The fact that the young man was in the first line meant that he was the best choice for Nobilis. Origin, wealth, and position at court were never the most important things for Agatha. The lady asked the young man about his attitude towards gambling, mistresses, and his intention to kill her after the birth of an heir. The young man was surprised by the questions and answered negatively to all of them. The main character asked if Enoch was ready to accept her conditions, and he replied that he would try. He will try because his wife wants him to. The girl asked to be protected from her relatives and to live in a separate house for newlyweds after the wedding. The Marquis said he would respect Agatha's rights as a wife. He asked if these were all the requirements, and the lady was surprised. The heroine would have liked Enoch to love her, but she didn't ask for such nonsense. After all, it's absurd to talk about feelings in a marriage of convenience. The girl replied that that was all. The young man said thoughtfully that he really didn't understand what Agatha's previous marriage had been like for her. Suddenly, the Marquis got down on one knee and declared that he had only one request. He asked not to have any connections with his relatives. The guy hoped that his relatives would not lead the lady astray. Agatha replied that she now had support that was more reliable than would be hard to find. The young man was pleased with her answer. The girl didn't know how to describe the feeling caused by this short moment and his smile. The young man touched Lady Nobilis's hand with his lips again. Enoch asked if the heroine would marry him if he accepted all her conditions. Agatha agreed with great joy. All that remained was to obtain His Majesty's approval, but before that, some things needed to be sorted out. Negotiations with Mainucor would begin after the wedding, but it was necessary to prepare the island of Pahlavi as a trading base in advance. The Marquis asked whether this circumstance was connected with why the Emperor was so insistent on a new marriage. The girl told her fiancé about the Emperor's plans for trade with the Eastern continent. In addition, she offered to give one of the islands to Enoch. Agatha asked the guy to return her proposal, which he had already looked at. The young man asked to pretend that he had not seen this document, so that it would not look like he was receiving payment for his future wife. The lady noted that everything looked like this before the wedding was discussed. She added that it was a way to understand exactly what was missing in Arata's house now. The Marquise was slightly embarrassed by the bride's remarks. Agatha promised the boy to ask for an audience with the Emperor as soon as possible. Enoch Arata returned to his residence. The secretary met the gentleman and took the clothes from him. The head of the house inquired whether anything special had happened and received a negative answer. As he walked through the hall, the Marquis noticed that the servants were passing bundles of paper to each other. The young man ordered that all letters of introduction, without exception, be returned. The guy announced that he was going to get married. All the servants were in shock. Ben remembered that the gentleman had ordered a list of candidates to be compiled just a couple of days ago. The secretary asked if the Marquis had a lady in mind, and he confirmed his suspicions. Ben was interested in what kind of family the young man's chosen one came from. Enoch replied that his bride was Agatha Nobilis. The guy said that he had already received consent from the girl. The secretary, surprised by such a rapid development of events, grabbed his head. The faithful servant promised to immediately destroy the list of candidates. The Marquis asked to prepare flowers to make a formal proposal of marriage. Ben promised to collect and present the most beautiful bouquet. The secretary realized that talking to the lady about the proposal did not count for now. The young man confirmed his guess. Ben was surprised that Agatha was seriously considering paying the price for saving her life. The servant realized that the lady had decided to sort out the situation of the family in advance, and he was filled with boundless trust in her. This was not the only reason, but the Marquise did not try to dissuade Ben. Enoch was very keen for Agatha to get along with his secretary. The girl is used to carrying everything on her own, but Ben can lend a shoulder at the right time. The guy wondered if it was too early for him to think about this, but it was normal to worry about his future wife. Marquis Arata was worried about how his relatives would react to the news of the wedding, because they would definitely not remain silent. He decided to warn Sister Isabel in advance. Sometime later, Enoch was conducting training for his knights. Suddenly, several young men burst into the hall shouting. The Marquise entrusted the training to Leon Tacrane. and he himself went to see what had happened. The young men began to ask questions about the marriage of the head of the house. Enoch replied that if those who came continued to make noise, he would not say anything. Everyone obediently fell silent. The gentleman ordered to ask calmly, and one by one. The main question was whom the Marquise would take as his wife. The guy replied that his chosen one was Agatha Nobilis, and the official matchmaking would take place in a couple of days. The young men's mouths dropped open in surprise. One of the young men asked again whether they were really talking about the same heiress of the Nobilis family. The Marquise confirmed and added that all conditions of the offer would be fulfilled. The young man still did not understand that if a gentleman marries a lady, why should she pay the price for her life? But at that moment, Ben came up and asked Enoch to go out to the entrance of the estate. There were several luxurious carriages parked near the porch. Denny Keeler, the first manager of the Nobilis house, approached the Marquise. The guy asked whether Keeler had arrived to fulfill the terms of the offer. The young men were even more surprised to see the rich carriages and the Nobilis' attorney. Denny said that he brought documents for 100,000 kara and for the trading house. The steward handed the Marquise a letter from Lady Agatha. Enoch unfolded the letter, in which the girl called him her beloved future groom. The main character wrote that she decided not to put off important things and sent the administrator early in the morning. She reported that permission for an audience would soon be received, and entry into the palace for the Marquise had already been arranged. At the end, the lady added that she was looking forward to the next meeting. Agatha's letters used to be dry, but this one is surprisingly warm. Enoch invited the manager to the mansion to discuss the affairs of the trading house. After matters were settled, Denny Keeler left the Arata residence. The young head of the clan sat down at the table to write a letter to his bride, but he was again distracted by curious young men. They were interested in what the Marquis would exchange with the lady in exchange for the engagement, and what was in the girl's letter. The guy was tired of these endless empty questions. He showed the young people the door. One of the young men asked if the others had seen the first lines of the letter that the gentleman was writing. In these lines, the Marquis called Agatha his beloved bride. But then the secretary came out of the office and heard the conversation. The young man tried to find out from Ben how everything went, but the Marquis's secretary only showed the sealed letter. Before this, he told the head of the house that this letter was the warmest of all the recent letters. The young men realized that something more than just a marriage of convenience was in store. One of the young men remarked that this was Enoch's first real love since then. But another young man said that such conversations on this bright day were inappropriate. After reading the groom's letter, Agatha noted that his handwriting was usually light, as if it were flying. But this letter was written carefully, each letter written with special care. At this time, the lady was informed of the arrival of the Marquise of Arata, and her face lit up. The girl headed to her reception room. Opening the door slightly, Agatha caught the scent of flowers. Enoch stood in the room with a beautiful bouquet in his hands. The girl was amazed when she saw him. The guy said that he tried to choose a bouquet that would suit the lady and hoped for her approval. After all the coldness, Agatha finally felt cared for and realized that she really liked the Marquise. Under the surprised gaze of the courtiers, the young man knelt down in front of the girl. He kissed her tender hand and promised to take care of her and protect her under any circumstances. The knights of Lady Nobilis were astonished. Enoch asked if Agatha accepted his proposal. The girl thought that she was in for a marriage of convenience, but the groom spoke with such seriousness and sincere intention that her heart sank. Smiling, the lady said that she had heard the young man's oath. She rose up on her toes and kissed the guy on his hot cheek. Then Agatha spoke words of agreement. The lady walked out into the garden, arm in arm with her official groom. The courtiers whispered among themselves, for the rumors had already spread. The Marquise asked the girl if she was feeling better, and she replied that she was perfectly fine, but she was pleased that the young man was worried about her health. The lady invited Enoch to look over the plan of events that needed to be submitted to the emperor. The guy realized that they were talking about trade with the eastern continent. The girl said that she would not like to take part in the negotiations with Manhwa, but His Majesty insisted that she go. Agatha did not want to reveal the true reason for her reluctance, but there was no point in hiding it from her future husband. The heroine admitted that the empire's relations with Manhwa are currently strained due to her divorce from Prince Fernand. The Marquise was a little worried by this answer. The girl said that Manhwa was to blame for the divorce, but if she spoke out now, the tension would ease. Agatha was worried about the impression her words had made on the young man. But not a muscle moved on Enoch's face. At this point, the valet approached the lady and the marquise. He announced that the young people were invited to the imperial dinner in 2 days. The girl asked the groom if they would see each other at the palace, but he answered negatively. He leaned towards Agatha's face and whispered that he would pick her up. On the appointed day, the lady must be ready. The marquis said that they would see each other in 2 days. After this, the man left. As he left, he wondered if he had been too hasty. The guy didn't know what came over him, but it felt nice to touch the girl's cheek with his lips. From the first day, the young man could not get the fragile girl out of his head, who was primarily concerned not with herself, but with keeping the house in order. She was still in the Marquis's head. The action moves to the residence of Duke Nuta. The Duke's mother slammed her fist on the table in rage. Less than 3 months have passed since Agatha and Theodore's divorce, and the girl is already getting married again, and the Duke risks becoming a laughingstock. The Duke's grandmother calmly stated that if Lady Nobilis had had any common sense, she would not have done such a thing. Then her eyes flashed dangerously, and the woman said that as long as she lived, this wedding would not happen. The daughter replied that she was counting on her mother's wisdom, but Agatha was a completely different story. The Duke's sister agreed that the lady never bowed her head to them. The heroine always spoke, looking straight into the eyes, with her back straight. The sister recalled how Agatha insisted that the Nuda family was oppressing her, and because of this, Theodore began to look at his relatives differently. If dirty rumors start to spread, the main character will not cover them up, just like she did during the divorce. The mother said that this is why they still can't go out in public. The women demanded an answer from old woman Newt. She replied bitterly that they already knew what Theodore had become. The elderly lady more than once caught her grandson with alcohol, in which he drowned his sorrows. The young man asked if no one in the family could look at his chosen one with warmth. Grandmother called Agatha a prickly weed that grew in the Nobilis house. Finally, the woman decided to give one last instruction to the one who was her daughter-in-law. She has too strong a patron, but if you think about it, shame is possible, and it is best to do it on the autumn hunt. The Nobilis mansion on the day of the audience. Stepping out onto the porch, Agatha saw Enoch waiting for her. The young man turned around, and his eyes widened in surprise. The girl was dressed in a stunning outfit and was all sparkling with beauty. Coming closer, the Marquise kissed the lady's hand and asked how the night had gone. The heroine replied that she was well prepared for the upcoming battle. Taking the man by the elbow, she said that at the meeting they must not give His Majesty a reason to doubt himself. Enoch felt good feeling the girl's hand on his shoulder. The young people got into the carriage and went to the palace. The Marquise looked out the window and looked worried. Agatha asked what happened and why the guy was so silent. The young man asked the lady about her preferences regarding the wedding day, but the heroine believed that the emperor would set the date. She will also take care of the dress, decorations, and the choice of the ceremony location. In the past, due to politics and the groom's background, she was never allowed to choose for herself, but now they must allow her. Agatha suggested holding the ceremony in a modest but beautiful church near the capital. The groom allowed the girl to do as she wished, because he wanted the place to reflect the bride's taste. The main character was curious why such warm words were coming from those cold lips. The lady wanted to spend her honeymoon by the sea, and the young man suggested an island. Here, the young people were informed that the carriage had arrived at the imperial palace. The head of state greeted his goddaughter and her fiancé with joy. Vormalai II announced that he was aware of the engagement of Agatha and Enoch. He finds the couple of the war hero and the emperor's goddaughter beautiful. Avoiding long speeches, the emperor asked if everything was ready for the wedding. The girl thanked the ruler for his attention and presented him with a plan of action. After studying the plan, the emperor admitted that Agatha had come with the ideal groom and impeccable preparation. The embarrassed heroine asked not to overpraise her and suggested discussing everything over lunch. In the imperial dining room, a luxurious table was set with exotic fruits and an abundance of sumptuous dishes. Agatha enjoyed the food served. The Marquis noticed that the bride liked seafood, and she said that she loved everything related to the sea. The girl invited Enoch to go fishing together in a coastal town because she loves to cook and eat freshly caught fish. The young man said that he once caught riverfish during the war. The emperor noted that the young people got along well, and he could rest assured. Agatha thanked her godfather for his kindness and asked his opinion about the plan. The ruler replied that the heroine had never disappointed him. He boasted of his goddaughter's intelligence and care to Enoch, and made him promise to protect the girl. Vormalai insisted on an early date for the wedding ceremony, but Lady Nobilis suggested next month to have time to prepare everything. The emperor agreed to the beginning of the month. He promised to send ambassadors to Menukor that same day, and added that a response should be expected within a month. The bishop also reminded about the need to go to Pahlavi, resolve port issues, and concluded that there was absolutely no time. Then Agatha suggested postponing the ceremony a little so that she could meet with the Minukors on Pahlavi, but Enoch interrupted her, saying that it would be safer to meet with the Minukor ambassadors when the heroine already had a husband. The emperor warmly supported this statement, as the Minukoro might again demand a dynastic marriage. The young man suggested going to Pahlavi together, including the island in their honeymoon itinerary. Agatha was pleasantly surprised that her fiancé did not want to let her go to the island alone. The action moves to the palace of the second prince of the Menukor Empire. Fernand looked at the document sent to him in surprise. The letter said that Lady Nobilis was getting married again. The prince believed that it was time for the girl to stop after so many weddings and divorces. The young man did not understand why Agatha simply did not return to him, because no matter how you look at it, he was better than her new chosen one. The guy was handsome and never let his ex-wife down in bed. Fernand didn't understand how it was possible not to choose him, because he considered himself ideal. The prince instructed his valet to find out who was now with Agatha. Meanwhile, a salon was organized on Lady Nobilis's terrace. The ladies were glad to meet the main character, and were keenly interested in her affairs, especially her upcoming wedding. The women said that Agatha was simply glowing, and they couldn't wait to see her wedding dress. The girl thanked them for their kindness and for coming despite the haste of the invitation. The lady was pleased to hear that all the ladies were glad to see her. She had often thought about them all these months. One of the girls noted that the main topic now is Agatha. The main character was surprised, because she thought that her weddings were already a familiar sight. The ladies laughed and said that the lady, as always, knows how to tease. Agatha realized that she always remained an object of discussion for the nobility. Everyone was talking about her 7th wedding, noting that the atmosphere was filled not with calculation, but with genuine tenderness. In addition, rumors spread that Lady Nobilis would become the owner of a new trading point, and that the honeymoon would be combined with negotiations. The fair-haired girl timidly asked when the ceremony was scheduled. The main character announced that she had gathered noble ladies at her place to personally present them with wedding invitations. Having unfolded the invitations, the girls saw that the ceremony would take place in just 3 weeks. Agatha was happy because for the first time she was handing out invitations to guests herself. At this time, a maid approached the girl and whispered something, which made the lady's eyes widen. Everyone sitting at the table turned towards the entrance. Enoch Arata entered the terrace in full dress. The heroine was delighted to see her lover, and her face lit up with a smile. The young man said he stopped by the Nobilis mansion on his way for a couple of minutes. The guy just wanted to see each other and hoped he wasn't intruding. Agatha asked to spare 20 minutes and suggested taking a walk in the garden. Enoch agreed and took the bride by the hand. The lovers strolled arm in arm through the garden, and the marquise noticed that the lady looked paler than usual. The girl admitted that she hasn't been sleeping well lately. The heroine said that she sent the young man's secretary 3 plans for renovating their home, and the young man liked the third one the most. Agatha was hesitant about the third option, as it had a separate marital bedroom, which was too intimate for a political marriage. The guy said that he wanted to secure his chosen one's consent in advance. He told how relatives tried to play the role of the wife of the head of the Arata clan, and the astonished lady asked if they had managed to find out who was behind it. Enoch replied that he was going to punish those who had dishonored his house, and this time they would not get off with exile. The young man was going to be away on this business for 2 weeks and left a carrier pigeon for his bride so that she could write. The girl was sorry to part, and she asked the marquise to take care of himself on the way. Agatha warned that after the guy's return, a whirlwind of affairs would swirl. The marquis said goodbye to the lady and promised to return as soon as possible. The heroine asked him not to overdo it. The young man was a little surprised by her words, because it was his remark. The girl did not understand why. For a moment, Enoch's gaze became completely alien. 10 days later, Baron Deco's mansion was filled with blood. The Knights of Arata dealt cruelly with those who resisted. The Marquis was approached by his second deputy, Hubert Carwin. He reported that Baron Deco's household had been captured. The stern commander thanked the knights for their good work. Enoch asked if he remembered correctly that the heir to the Baron's house was the eldest son. The tied man confirmed that this was so, and now the second son became the heir. Here, those in the mansion noticed a homing pigeon in the air. The dove landed on the Marquis's hand, and he realized that the bird had brought a letter from Agatha. The guy began to carefully read his beloved's letter. Huber asked what was written there. Enoch replied that the lady was asking him to return quickly and tied a reply letter to the dove's leg. The deputy asked the commander what he intended to do with the Decho family. The released dove flew away in the direction of the noblest mansion. The Marquis announced that, from that moment on, the second son became the new baron. The eldest son looked at Enoch in horror, his face covered in cold sweat. My lord ordered that the former heir be brought to trial. The bound criminal begged for mercy as he was led away by Arata's knights. The Marquis threw the seal of his house at the feet of the new heir. The guy expressed hope that he would not have to return here again. The new Baron Deco meekly promised not to disgrace the trust placed in him. 4 days later, the Order of Arata entered the gates of the Empire's capital, Roxbad. Stopping, Enoch asked Carwin how things were going in the first residence, where Lady Nobilis was staying. The deputy replied that everything was calm, and there had been no attempted invasion. Milord decided to check if Agatha was asleep, and Huber went with him. A tired girl sat at her desk with a pen in her hand. The valet brought the lady a cup of tea and said that it was time for her to rest, as it was already almost 2 o'clock in the morning. The lady promised to follow the advice once she had finished the part of the work she had started. The heroine asked the young man to see why it was so noisy outside. It was indeed restless outside the window, because the Marquis of Arata and his assistants were wandering around there. The girl put the papers aside and leaned back in her chair, exhausted. Suddenly, her eyes widened in surprise. Enoch stood at the threshold of the office with his arms crossed over his chest. The heroine noticed that the young man must be tired from the journey and needed to rest. The young man frowned when he heard questions about his health. He replied that everything was fine and apologized for the late visit. The lovers sat down at the table in Agatha's office. The girl asked if the Marquise had managed to settle everything. The guy replied that he had finished everything and could stay in the capital for a while. The heroine was very glad to hear this. Enoch asked why the lady looked paler than before his departure. Agatha was embarrassed that it was so noticeable and replied that she had a lot to do. The girl didn't like to put things off, lest everything go wrong later. The lady offered to walk the young man to the door, but he interrupted her. The Marquise wanted to know the bride's schedule for the next day. The heroine realized that the guy was interested in how things were going in his absence, and readily agreed. Enoch wanted to take the girl to her chambers, but she preferred to remain in the hall. The young man noticed that it was almost dawn, and too late for official meetings in the hall. Agatha gave in and allowed herself to be led into the chambers. It seemed that she had imperceptibly begun to allow her lover more. The valet thanked the Marquise for persuading his lady to rest. The guy was sure that the lady spent sleepless nights, although she tried not to show it. Enoch said that he could handle some of the things on the girls' list for tomorrow himself. The young man asked his valet to prepare a report for him in the morning and not to disturb Agatha. The servant was ordered to send the Marquise all documents that required a signature. After this, my lord rode off to his residence. On the way, the guy kept thinking about Agatha. Now he began to understand why the girl so stubbornly pulled everything on herself. There was no one next to the lady to lean on. Enoch understood where this subtle feeling of closeness came from, because he had been the same way when he lost his parents and found himself at war. But the guy got out of it and became stronger, and Agatha didn't even realize that she didn't have to carry it all alone. Now that the Marquise knows everything, he simply cannot stay away. The main character is his fiancé, and he is not so stupid as to make the same mistake again. The next morning, Lady Nobilis sat in her office, feeling refreshed. The valet handed her the papers that Enoch had already put in order. When the heroine woke up, she was even confused that it was already daytime, and no one had woken her up. The servant said that the Marquise had strictly ordered not to wake the girl, and had taken care of all the affairs himself. Agatha saw that her fiancé had looked through all the papers in the morning, carefully sorted them, and even gone to the morning meeting in her place. The lady felt unusual and even a little awkward, resting until almost noon. At that moment, my lord entered the gates of the noblest residence. Agatha joyfully greeted her lover. The guy noted that the heroine looks much better. He hoped that the girl was not offended by the order not to wake her, and this was indeed the case. The lady thought that the young man only did what he was allowed to do and never crossed the line. The main character thanked the young man for his concern and said that she would handle the rest on her own. However, the guy noted that today, it would be better for Agatha to rest a little again, since he had already supervised all the wedding preparations. The girl was extremely surprised by such efficiency. The Marquis stated that the bride had only one thing to do today: try on her wedding dress. The lady was embarrassed by this statement and wanted to object, but then the servants announced the arrival of Madame Salette. The young man asked permission to come tomorrow to help further. The heroine was surprised and delighted that her fiancé would come tomorrow too. The man said he planned to visit the girl all week. Enoch would like to give the lady a proper vacation, but the wedding venue inspection will not be completed without her. Agatha understood that she would only be entrusted with what required her personal involvement, that is, the menu and wedding decorations. The guy asked if it was possible to invite his team to the noblest mansion to do business together. After all, with his support, everything will go much faster. The heroine understood that everything was moving more easily with her fiancé, but she still found it difficult to delegate. The girl realized that the time had come to trust, because everything worked smoothly in Arata's house, and the servants were silent as stone. And most importantly, the lady didn't want to refuse. Agatha liked the way Enoch took care of her. Time flew by, and the morning of the wedding day arrived. As expected, the main character turned the humble chapel into a whole world. The guests were delighted, because everything turned out to be even more beautiful than they could have imagined. At that moment, Duke Theodore Nuda, Agatha's ex-husband, entered the church. People in society had heard that he was not in the best condition after the divorce, but they did not expect him to be so pale. The ladies whispered that only one invitation had been sent to Newt's house for the Duke. Lady Nobilis looked dazzling in her wedding dress. The maid informed the girl that His Majesty had already arrived, and the ceremony was beginning. My Lord Marquis had completed all the preparations and was already waiting. It was time for the bride to go out, but she was a little worried. There had been many weddings in the heroine's life, but this was the first time her heart had trembled like this. Finally, the beautiful bride came out into the ceremonial hall. The girl couldn't believe that she was really marrying Enoch. At the end of the ceremony, the priest asked the newlyweds to exchange rings. Agatha was happy to marry this man, but somewhere deep down she was still uneasy. Yet at that moment, she was truly happy. The emperor expressed his congratulations to his goddaughter on her wedding. The newlyweds modestly thanked His Majesty. After this, Agatha was congratulated by the crown prince, whom they had not seen for a long time. The young man asked permission to be his sister's second dance partner at the reception after the ceremony. The girl agreed, because she understood that her brother would not ask for a dance without a reason. Suspicions crept into the heroine's soul that something had happened, but then Enoch came up and told his wife that he wanted to introduce her to someone. Prince Anthony apologized for keeping his sister too long and left. The heroine began to feel even more strongly that something was fishy here, but she hoped that everything would become clear soon and tried to focus on the present. The young man introduced his sister, Isabel Areta, to Agatha. A sweet girl congratulated the main character on her wedding and said that they were now one family. The ladies hoped that everything would work out well for them from now on. After the official ceremony, a sumptuous feast took place. The celebration was for everyone who came to share this day with the newlyweds. It wasn't the first time Agatha had danced her first dance, but why was she so nervous? Enoch's hand on her waist distracted her from her thoughts. Suddenly, the girl stumbled, but her husband managed to catch her. The guy leaned very close to the Marquise's face and asked if everything was okay. The trembling did not subside, and the heroine pressed herself against her husband's chest. Prince Anthony approached and reminded his sister of her promise to be his partner for the second dance. Hiding her excitement, the girl replied that it was a great honor for her. While dancing, the crown prince noticed that Agatha was unusually tense today. His sister asked him to stop playing with words and get down to business. His Highness stated that the invitation to dance was prompted by a curious piece of news. The young man asked if Agatha knew who would be Minukor's ambassador at the preliminary negotiations. The Marquise's eyes widened as she realized that the ambassador would be her ex-husband. The girl looked at the balcony where the imperial couple sat. It became clear that all this was the machinations of the Godfather. More than 10 years ago, an incident occurred in the Minucar Empire. Saddened, Agatha thought about why her husband couldn't live without changing women every day. Walking through the garden, she noticed a boy whom she saw there for the first time. In response to the lady's question, the maid replied that there was no need to pay attention to the child. His Highness would sort everything out himself. The girl realized that the boy was connected with Fernand. The heroine was writing at the table in her office when Prince Menukora entered. The guy said that he heard about his wife meeting a boy in the garden. The young man sat down on the edge of the table, and the lady caught the scent of someone else's perfume. Fernand declared that he was also a victim, because some beautiful woman had fooled him and given birth to a child. Agatha asked sullenly if he was that scared. The impudent man placed the girl's hand on his chest so that she could hear how wildly his heart was beating. But despite the apparent panic, the heart beat evenly and calmly. Lady Nobilis's patience snapped and she asked for a divorce. This is how her second marriage ended. Agatha tried to pull herself together because the reception was still going on. The girl had to smile and bring the evening to an end. She approached Enoch and asked how long he had to wait. The Marquise replied that everything was fine. He had just spoken with Count Thiers. Count Thiers developed a new agricultural variety and wanted to present it to the newlyweds. It was clear that the Count was trying to strengthen ties with the help of the harvest. Another guest boasted that he had brought some good fabrics. The heroine only laughed sweetly in response to these banal tricks. The reception ended, and the newlyweds boarded the carriage to travel to Arata's residence. Agatha asked if her husband was very tired during the day. Enoch was sure that the girl was much more tired, because she had been on her feet all day, and in uncomfortable shoes at that. He knelt down and began to remove the shoes from the heroine's feet. This gesture shocked the Marquise, and she was completely at a loss. The young man began to massage Agatha's feet, saying that this was how they relieved fatigue during the war. The girl felt a strange sensation, as if a flame was flaring up somewhere inside. The guy's hands began to rise higher and higher. Suddenly, the heroine sharply pushed her husband away. The man tried to justify himself by saying that he wanted to stretch his calf muscle. Upon arrival at the mansion, the newlyweds were met by the Marquise's secretary. The servants bowed their heads, welcoming the new mistress into the house of Arata. Agatha was delighted by the warm welcome and asked Ben to look after them that night. The secretary promised to do everything possible while the newlyweds' house was being renovated. It was strange for the heroine to spend her wedding night outside her husband's house. Enoch said that the Marquise would spend the night in his room tonight. The girl was surprised, because she thought she would spend the night in separate rooms. The young man opened the door and invited them to look around. The room was, like the Marquise himself, everything was strict, clean, and to the point. Ben was tasked with escorting the mistress to the bathroom so she could freshen up. The lady remarked that the residence was very beautiful, and the secretary replied that this was largely due to her help. The girl realized that the servant was so polite and courteous because she had been sending funds to Arata's house even before the wedding. Agatha tried for Enoch's sake, but earned recognition from the other side. Ben declared that this was now the house and my lady's, and he would serve her with full dedication. The heroine happily replied that she was counting on the secretary. The girl enjoyed a warm bath while the maid combed her hair. Then another maid came in with a tray, saying that my lord had ordered dinner to be brought to his wife. On the tray, there was cold white wine and thinly sliced meat and cheese. This was exactly what Agatha needed. The main character looked out the window at the mansion that was being renovated and had been empty for more than 10 years. The thought that soon all this would belong to her somehow excited the lady. The Marquise was informed that his wife had arrived. Agatha entered wearing a light nightgown and with her hair down. Enoch looked at her with loving eyes. Then the young man came up and picked up the girl in his arms. The man asked if my lady had enjoyed the dishes served, and she answered in the affirmative. The guy was glad to hear this. He carefully laid Agatha on the bed and hovered over her. The girl felt Enoch's warm breath on her face. The young man tenderly kissed his wife on the forehead, and she trembled. Then the kisses moved to the neck. The main character couldn't even imagine that the guy could be so persistent. Enoch looked into Agatha's eyes and said her name, and the girl's heart began to beat even faster. The husband touched her face and asked if he could continue. The heroine did not object. The The young people merged into a passionate kiss. The young man's hands were so hot and careful, and the longer he touched, the more ticklish and sweet it became to the point of pain. Meanwhile, in the capital of the empire, Manhwa, the head of state summoned his son and said that he had discussed his request with the council and the heir. The young man was allowed to act as a representative in the negotiations with Roxbad, and he was overjoyed. Ferdinand's father instructed him to take advantage of the opportunity to restore ties with the empire and settle the issue of the disputed islands. But he did not listen, and most importantly, the prince had to settle a long-standing feud with the heiress of the House of Nobilis. Fernand said he understood what his father was talking about and why he was allowed to go to the negotiations. The emperor did not fully trust his son, especially since relations with Nobilis had been damaged, and restoring diplomacy with their homeland would not be easy. After winning the 10 Years' War, Roxbad's prestige was skyrocketing as they received new ports, land, and huge war indemnities. Moreover, Agatha was married to a young marquise who was called a genius of war. Emperor Manhwa was concerned about the rapid growth of the influence of the House of Nobilis. If the unbearable prince hadn't done stupid things, there would have been no divorce from the main character, nor conflict with Roxbad. The ruler asked how the prince's son was doing, and he became slightly embarrassed. Ferdinand promised to take care of the boy, because even though he was illegitimate, he was also of imperial blood. The emperor told the boy to step up and remember what he had said. Squinting slyly, the heir promised not to let him down. Pulling back the curtain, the young man saw that active preparations for negotiations were underway outside. Standing by the window, the prince silently watched what was happening. Agatha was having breakfast in her office when the first assistant of the Nobilis house, Isel Masro, came in to see her. Isel reported that the delegation list has not yet been approved. As the lady expected, the emperor wanted her not to know until the very end that Prince Ferdinand would be at the negotiations. The girl decided to go personally to check if all her things had arrived at Arta's house. Near the Marquise's residence, work was in full swing to collect supplies for Pahlavi. Agatha checked the situation with food, drinking water, and everything necessary. But here the heroine and her maids stopped in amazement. A moment later, the girl's face lit up with joy. The Marquise rushed cheerfully to her husband, and he was surprised that his wife had arrived so early. The wife replied that she wanted to make sure everything was prepared. Huber Carwin approached the couple and said that he was glad to meet my lady. The young man introduced himself and said that he would accompany the gentleman on their trip. The guy boasted that the other deputy of the Marquise, Leon Takran, was jealous of him, since it was Huber who was going with the lady to the island. Enoch Aratus grew tired of this boasting and interrupted his deputy's speech. Agatha was flattered that people who had spent 10 years at the front were not shy about showing their sympathy for her. Valet Ben said that everything was ready for departure. The Marquise ordered Huber to stop chattering and organize the knights, which he did. When everything was organized, the carriages set off. Karuan thought with a smile that his test was complete. The luxurious cortege headed towards the port to sail to Pahlavi. Enoch and Agatha sat side by side in the carriage and chatted pleasantly. Outside security was provided by the Knights of the Order of Arata. By sunset, the travelers arrived at the inn. Looking at the building, the gentleman and lady agreed that the courtyard was a bit simple. After all, the province is the province. The Marquis even offered the lady to spend the night in the carriage, if that would be more convenient. But Agatha said that she was used to the road, and besides, it would be easier for the security guards to post a guard when she was in the room. Enoch and Huber were once again amazed by the heroine's resilience and prudence. The deputy escorted the commander and his wife to their room, noting that the lady would be allocated the best room. But upon entering the room, all three saw that the room was in disrepair. The men and ladies stood hesitantly before the door. Trying not to lose optimism, the girl called over the maid Jessie. Jessie asked to wait a minute and began to masterfully wield a rag and a mop. Those who observed this were amazed by the girl's dexterity. A few moments later, the room sparkled with cleanliness and order. When asked about the Marquis's chambers, Huber replied that they were at the end of the corridor on the right, and the tireless Jessie went there. While the rooms were being prepared, Agatha invited my lord to have dinner together. The young man readily agreed to his wife's proposal. The dinner was beautifully organized. The tables were laden with meat, drinks, and desserts. The tired knights were amazed by the quantity and variety of dishes. The main character noticed some stiffness in the young people's behavior and decided to always make sure they had everything they needed. On the 6th day of the journey, the overnight stay was set up right in the middle of the forest. A large fire was lit in the clearing. Despite the camping conditions, the dinner still impressed with its sophistication. The knights discussed how the life of the order had changed for the better with the arrival of the mistress of the house. The young men were amazed not only by the lady's endurance, but also by how well she had organized her supplies of water and provisions. Huber Carwin remarked that they had finally found a true mistress. The knights swore to be faithful to their mistress to the end. The 10th day of the journey arrived, and the crews entered the port. The manager welcomed my lord and lady at the port of Saint-Antoine. Agatha smiled happily, but Enoch was a little tense. The Marquis asked if the ship of the Nobilis family had already arrived, and the manager answered in the affirmative. The guy offered to inspect the ship, and the couple agreed. After checking, the newlyweds got into the carriage, where Agatha began to study the papers. In response to her husband's question, the main character replied that she was studying materials on the navy of the Mainucor Empire. Frowning, the man asked if there was a problem, but his wife denied it. The girl doubted whether to tell the Marquise in advance what she knew. But Enoch took the documents from her hands. The young man knew that the embassy would be accompanied by the fleet commander himself, which meant that the delegation would include someone of high birth. Embarrassed, Agatha admitted that her ex-husband, the second prince of the empire, Ménucor Fernand, would be at the embassy. The guy's face changed. It looked like he was jealous. But the Marquis did not show any signs of his distress. The main character looked at her husband, trying to understand what he was thinking about. The girl thought about what she really expected from the young man. She remembered the solemn wedding ceremony. I remembered the night we spent together. Even if the guy was gentle, in the end, they were just a married couple bound together by necessity. Agatha understood perfectly well that it was foolish to expect feelings from a marriage of convenience, and that she shouldn't deceive herself. But then Enoch gently touched the Marquise's face. The guy noticed that the lady didn't look well today, and he would meet with the Navy representatives himself while the girl rested. The main character readily agreed. She was pleased by the young man's care, and she became increasingly greedy for manifestations of his feelings. If this man fell in love with Agatha, she would be so happy. Enoch said goodbye to his wife and promised to return soon. The girl was worried that the young man wouldn't be able to cope alone, but he assured her that he was not as simple as he seemed. The lady looked at the young man with love and tenderness. The boy watched the carriage that was taking his wife away. It became clear to the Marquis that the heroine was behaving strangely because of the second prince. He also realized that the girl had been watching his reaction all this time. Here the lord was informed that preparations for sailing were complete. Enoch understood that Fernand's arrival could not be called a pleasant event. The boy ordered his knights to set out. Time flew by, and now the 9th day of the journey from Saint-Antoine to Pahlavi has arrived. During this time, Roxbad's side received a list of Mainucor's delegates, and as expected, the embassy was headed by the second prince of the empire. Agatha remembered Prince Anthony's words, which turned out to be true. The lady's ship arrived faster than expected, and the island was already visible on the horizon. The heroine recalled that only 3 berths are operational on Pahlavi, while the rest are undergoing repairs. The secretary reported that work on the berths is planned to be completed within 2 weeks. Busy with giving orders, Milady didn't notice someone approaching from behind. Enoch put his arm around the girl's waist and asked if she really was going to go straight to the construction site. Agatha confirmed that she wanted to have everything ready before the delegation arrived. One of the knights, Chad, reported that, according to scouts, the Mainucor ambassadors would arrive within 3 days. The delegates arrive faster than the Marquise expected, and there is almost no time to prepare. The Marquis interrupted the girl's thoughts by saying her name. The guy asked permission to help with the preparations, but the lady replied that the local manager had already prepared all the basics. Enoch asked if Agatha would be able to handle the meeting with the ambassadors, since they would have to go to sea. The girl replied that she was calm when he was nearby, so strong and experienced. Finally, the ship docked at the coast of the island. The ranks of soldiers solemnly greeted Lord and Lady Areta. The newlyweds were met by the manager of the Nobilis family, Phil Butler. Agatha was glad to see the manager, although she received his reports every year. but this was the first time she had personally come to the island since her coming-of-age ceremony. The girl looked at Pallavi with great interest. The lady noted that the management here was at the proper level, which made the manager very happy. The main character decided to inspect the construction site and head to the castle, and the Marquise expressed a desire to speak with representatives of the fleet. To ensure speed of travel, a horse was prepared for the Marquise instead of a carriage, but a difficulty arose. The girl stepped on the hem of her dress and almost fell. Immediately, strong arms grabbed her by the waist. Enoch lifted the girl with ease, freeing the pinned hem. Then the young man carefully seated the lady in the saddle. The guy regretted that he had not ordered his wife to have a riding habit prepared. Agatha assured that everything was fine, and that she didn't have far to go. Jessie reminded her about the sun umbrella, but the heroine understood that she definitely wouldn't be able to climb into the saddle with an umbrella. Then my lord called to Huber, who came at once. Enoch ordered the deputy to take the lady's umbrella. The sun was shining brightly, and the Marquise ordered Karuen not to leave the girl's side for a single step. Agatha thought that protecting his wife from the heat was not at all one of the husband's main duties, yet my lord did it. Having kissed the lady's hand, the young man asked her to return more carefully. The main character could not help but love a man who could be so attentive and gentle. With a sweet smile, the girl told her husband that they would see each other a little later. The pier was being expanded so that 10 ships could dock at Pallavi at the same time. Agatha looked over all the preparations, while Huber faithfully held the umbrella over her. The manager showed how construction was progressing in other places. The lady looked at everything with great interest and attention. In the end, she said that she was satisfied with everything and suggested returning to the castle. The castle on Pallavi was not as luxurious as the castles in the capital of Roxbad, but still very beautiful. The valet reported that the delegation from Menukor would arrive within 3 days. Agatha saw that the palace's furnishings were far behind the latest fashion trends, but there was no time for redecoration. Milady ordered Huber to take the knights and check the security and the deployment of soldiers in the castle. The young man obeyed without question. The girl herself, together with her servants, planned to decorate the second prince's room and the reception hall. After some time, the main hall sparkled with its beauty. Agatha was pleased with the result of her work, because now there was nothing to complain about. At this moment, the girl's thoughts were disturbed by one of the knights. He reported that Lord Arata had already arrived at the castle gates. Enoch, serious as always, entered the palace. The main character was very happy about her husband's imminent arrival. The Marquise looked at the girl silently, and this worried her. The lady began to think that she had given in to her feelings too much when she tenderly kissed the young man. After the unexpected kiss, Agatha immediately ran away, and the guy could have been confused. Here the young man touched the girl's cheek. Leaning towards his wife, the Marquise quietly whispered that he had returned. His face was so close that the heroine felt his warm breath. Milady asked the young man to quickly go to the palace. The guy was a little embarrassed and thoughtful. The girl suggested that her husband take a rest, and he asked if she would mind sharing a bedroom with him today. The man would prefer to sleep in the same room if it did not cause the heroine any inconvenience, and besides, it was safer. Agatha promised to instruct the butler to arrange everything this way. Dusk had fallen on Pallavi, and the sky was covered with pink clouds. The young Marquise chaired the meeting and noted that the Menukor delegation included members of the imperial family, so the reception must be held according to all the rules. The secretary suggested decorating the staircase with sculptures and serving oriental dishes during the presence of the second prince. Agatha continued discussing business and accidentally glanced out the window. She was surprised at how much time had passed since it had become so dark outside. Enoch had obviously been waiting for a long time, and the lady suggested that the assistants take a rest. As she approached the room, the girl noticed that the light was still on, which meant her husband had been waiting for her all this time. Opening the door, the heroine saw the Marquise, and her eyes widened. The young man was wearing only a nightshirt and looked even more handsome than usual. Agatha was speechless at his appearance and apologized for the delay. The young man smelled pleasant, apparently. He had recently taken a bath. With a commanding movement, the guy pulled the heroine towards him. The girl was confused by such pressure. Touching the lady's face, Enoch noticed that her cheeks were flushed, and he worried that his wife might be ill from constant work. The main character was shaking and blushing, not because she was ill, and she tried to hide it, claiming that she was just walking quickly. Agatha declared that she needed to return to the meeting, her heart pounding loudly. The girl told her husband to go to bed without her and to have breakfast in the morning, even if she was not there. Enoch stood bewildered at the door, which slammed right in his face. He regretted having frightened the lady with his assertiveness. 3 days later, ships approached the island in full sail. The flags of the Minukor Empire fluttered from the masts, and the delegates had finally arrived. The secretary told Agatha that the ships were approaching, but the girl had already seen it. The lady wondered if it was right to let Enoch meet Fernand before her, since the prince might talk all sorts of nonsense. The heroine's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden call. Turning around, she saw the second prince, dressed in his finest uniform. Agatha bowed ceremoniously and humbly greeted His Highness. Fernand apologized for his familiarity, explaining it by the extreme degree of joy he felt at the meeting. The young man thanked them for such a warm welcome. The prince pressed the girl's hand to his lips, and his eyes flashed predatory. The Marquis, who was observing this scene, was dissatisfied with Fernand's courtesy towards his wife. Agatha suggested that the second prince limit himself to dinner in the castle that day, and tomorrow explore the island and move on to the main negotiations. The boy agreed to do as the lady said and asked permission to accompany her to the castle. The main character was not impressed by the prospect of going to the palace in the company of her ex-husband. The girl looked back at her husband, but he was busy talking with Huber. Meanwhile, the second prince was already climbing into the carriage and was very surprised when the Marquise expressed a desire to ride in a separate carriage. Fernand insisted on going on a trip together. The young man offered to chat on the way, since he and the lady had not seen each other for so long. And besides, he had questions about the negotiations. The girl didn't want to get into the prince's carriage at all, but there were a lot of people around, and she was afraid of attracting unnecessary attention. Agatha asked her maid Marie to go with her. Fernando was saddened by the fact that he would not be left alone with his ex-wife. During the trip, the heroine remained silent, but His Highness was eager to talk. The prince asked if the lady would address him in the same formal manner, even when no one else was around. He called the girl by name again, but she asked him not to call her that. After all, the heroine is the goddaughter of Emperor Roxbad, the heiress of the ducal house of Nobilis, the mistress of the house of the Marquis of Arata, and now also an envoy representing the interests of her homeland. Fernand reluctantly agreed to maintain propriety. The prince cleared his throat before asking his next question. The guy thought that he would simply call the main character Milady, because it sounded much closer than the official title. The question of whether Agatha had been too hasty with her new marriage angered her, and the girl noticed that the prince was too interested in the affairs of his ex-wife's country. Meanwhile, the carriage was approaching the main tower of the castle. Confused, Fernand said the lady's name again. The girl demanded to be called a young marquise, since she had gotten married a month ago. Carouan knocked on the carriage door as the delegation arrived. Agatha asked her ex-husband to refrain from any actions that could cause misunderstandings. The main character met her husband's eyes. Enoch asked if the marquise had explained the further procedure to the prince, and she answered in the affirmative. The girl asked if anything unusual had happened when the man went out to accompany the prince, and the lord replied that everything was fine. The lady asked not to pay attention to the second prince's reaction, as he still regretted losing the heiress Nobilis. The marquise was slightly surprised by this statement. Agatha warned that Fernand could use this opportunity to pull the negotiations in his favor. Be that as it may, the girl was glad that her husband did not suspect her of anything. My lord and my lady turned at the secretary's call. The main character said that she needed to check on the preparations for the evening banquet, and left. The young man thought that it was all a misunderstanding. During the preparations for the banquet, the lady was informed that the second prince was asking permission to accompany her. Agatha was angered by this behavior, and ordered that the young man be told that she already had an agreement. Dipping her feet into the water with rose petals, the heroine wondered why Fernand seemed to be deliberately drawing suspicion onto himself. The girl was worried that these suspicions might cause new problems. At this time, the lady was informed of the marquise's arrival, which made her very happy. Enoch entered in a gleaming uniform and with his hair carefully coiffed. Agatha stood there in just a thin undershirt and asked me to wait for her for just a minute. The guy's eyes widened as he looked at his beautiful wife. The girl explained that she was delayed due to preparations for the reception. My lord ordered the servant to wait outside. The astonished young man did not have time to understand how he found himself behind the door. The marquise apologized for keeping her waiting. The young man could not take his eyes off the shining girl. Enoch extended his hand to his wife. The newlyweds went to the banquet hall, accompanied by Huber and the servants. The lady inquired about the second prince, and was informed that he had left with the delegates of Manhwa. Agatha realized that, if they were unlucky, they would encounter the ambassadors before even entering the hall. As they approached the banquet venue, the young people saw that this was exactly what had happened. His Highness frowned when he saw the couple. The prince asked if the lady had refused his escort in order to come with the marquise. Agatha's grip on her husband's elbow tightened, and Enoch's hand clenched into a fist. The girl was afraid that the young man would react strongly to Fernand's behavior. My lord's face was tense with anger. The main character realized that the second prince hurt her husband more than he let on. To smooth things over, the lady said that she could not burden his highness with her company, since her husband was with her. The girl invited everyone to enter the hall and taste special dishes, prepared especially for the reception. The prince replied sullenly that he was looking forward to the banquet. At dinner, Fernand raised his glass to the eternal union of Manhwa and Roxbad. The dishes on the table were truly special and exquisite. Ambassador Manhwa noted that the young marquise had put a lot of effort into this reception. Agatha modestly replied that she was only doing what she had to. Suddenly, the girl covered her husband's hand with her hand. The lady added that her husband allowed her to calmly carry out preparations, taking on the task of meeting the delegation. Enoch also replied that he was only doing his duty and was glad to help. Fernanda was irritated that some pathetic marquise dared to take a seat next to Agatha. The second prince believed that even a renowned war hero could not compare to the prince of the empire. The young man's anger became increasingly noticeable to those around him. He remembered that the Urti family had nothing but problems with finances and relatives. The marquise cleaned everything up when he returned from the war, but he hardly managed to get to the root of the problems. Suddenly, the prince asked out loud whether he was really better than Agatha's new husband. Fernand didn't have his own question and demanded an answer from the girl. The marquise asked his highness not to say anything that could be misunderstood, and he stated that he had regretted the divorce for many years. Enoch asked whether the second prince's words meant a challenge to a duel, since he had declared that he desired the marquise's wife. Fernand did not expect such a reaction, and the war hero's words frightened him. My lord was serious and said that he would gladly cross blades with the prince. Agatha was frightened by the developments. Cold sweat streamed down his highness's face. A deathly silence reigned at the table. Finally, Fernand announced that his words had been misunderstood. Marquis Arata's gaze remained cold and unyielding. In response to apologies from other members of the delegation, Enoch said they had nothing to apologize for. But the young man said that he would not tolerate a repeat of such a situation. My lord and my lady were returning to their bedroom after dinner. The girl felt awkward, but her husband said that he didn't suspect her of anything. Suddenly, the man pressed the main character against the wall and leaned towards her. Approaching the girl's lips, the guy said that he was offended by the second prince's behavior, and he could not tolerate it. Enoch kissed Agatha, holding her tenderly and touching her face with his palms. The couple continued kissing, and a moan escaped the girl's lips. The marquise picked up his wife in his arms. The young man asked the lady not to be alone with her ex-husband. The guy recalled the situation with the prince's carriage, and the girl replied that Marie was there with them. The heroine noticed that the marquise was not nearby at that moment. Having lowered his wife onto the bed, Enoch admitted that he had hoped to keep himself under control until this moment. But now the young man can't do this anymore. The lips of the newlyweds merged in a passionate kiss. The guy resolutely pressed the lady to the bed and took her hands. His kisses began to move lower. The marquise's hand lifted the hem of the girl's dress. The young man asked permission to hug the heroine. Agatha stroked his lips. The girl replied that there was no need to ask about that. After all, the heroes are husband and wife. The lovers kissed again. Meanwhile, the prince could not come to terms with the fact that Marquis Arata dared to push him against the wall. The young man demanded that they bring him more wine, but the servants tried to object that they should think about their health and tomorrow's meeting. Fernand, with the bottle, continued asking how Enoch dared to do this to him. He shouted in anger at how a lowly upstart could dare to pin the prince against the wall. What angered his highness most was that such a worthless fellow was near Agatha. The young man recalled how sternly the girl asked him to refrain from actions that could cause misunderstandings. Suddenly, the prince jumped up and headed for the door, causing astonishment among the servants. Fernand said that he wanted to clear up the misunderstanding between him and the marquise. The frightened servants did not know how to stop the drunken master. They tried to offer the prince more wine, but he firmly refused. Opening the door to his room, the young man announced that he would go to Agatha right away. At this time, my lord and the marquise were sleeping peacefully in their chambers. The girl's head rested on her husband's shoulder. Enoch was awakened by a noise in the corridor and opened his eyes. The knights standing outside the door were surprised that their master had woken up. The marquis asked what was causing such a noise. Huber Carwin explained that the problem was that His Highness was currently in their corridor. The second prince tried to break into Agatha's room, screaming loudly, but the knights held him back. Fernand desperately struggled out of their hands. The boy shouted that he had to give something to the marquise himself and asked her to leave for a minute. Enoch, shocked by the impudence, decided to leave the room and sort things out. The appearance of the war hero surprised the second prince. The young man asked why Lord Arata was leaving his ex-wife's chambers. The young man looked at the drunken, impudent fellow silently and with contempt. The prince asked again why the marquise had left Lady Nobilis's room. Enoch had no words to respond to this impudent outburst. He understood that it would be impossible to have a normal conversation with a drunken madman. The lord shamed his knights for only standing and watching while the prince walked here. The boy expressed hope that warriors do not consider blindly following any order to be loyalty. At this time, Fernand did not quite understand what was being discussed. The young man again began shouting his ex-wife's name at the top of his lungs, but then Enoch grabbed him tightly by the shoulders. Covering the mouth of the emperor's son with his hand, the marquis said that he was not feeling well and needed help. The second prince's servant said that it was not proper to treat His Highness in this way, and the milord suggested that the young man himself escort his master to his bedroom. The assistant was confused, and Enoch ordered him to step aside since he was not confident in himself. The young man continued to lead the high-born youth, covering his mouth with his hand. Having reached the place, the marquis pointed to the door of the bedchamber. The second prince angrily asked how the boy dared to drag him here like that. Enoch replied that Ferdinand had completely lost his composure. He noted that it was unacceptable to appear in the bedroom of a noble lady in the middle of the night. Coming close to His Highness, the young man asked how to understand the prince's actions. The young marquise advised Ferdinand not to show any more interest in his wife. Otherwise, the young man would begin to speak with his sword, not with words. The angry second prince asked if my lord's words were a threat. Enoch replied that this was not a threat, but a warning that he would have to pay for the consequences. In conclusion, the guy advised the impudent man to think carefully about how he should behave in the future. The marquis returned to Agatha's bedchamber. Opening the door, he noticed that the girl was not sleeping and was afraid that he had woken her up. The lady replied that she had woken up from the noise Fernand was making. Enoch said he wanted to figure it out without waking his wife, but it didn't work out that way. The main character objected that her husband already does more than enough for her. The girl admitted that during the 10 years of separation, the second prince had become even more stupid, and the marquis added that he was also pathetic because he had completely forgotten about his position and duties. Milord reassured Agatha, saying that he had personally escorted Fernand to the bedroom and that nothing else had happened. The guy hugged his wife tightly and kissed her on the cheek. The young man asked the heroine not to worry and try to rest, since everything had already been settled. The girl thanked him for his protection and promised to obtain a reward for her husband from His Majesty the Emperor upon her return. Enoch replied that the lady could do as she saw fit. The next day, negotiations began with the Minocor delegation. The discussion was about reducing the duty rate on goods and increasing trade volumes. Agatha took a sip of tea from her cup. Fernand looked angry and hurt, but he was surprisingly quiet. The marquise did not see a drop of remorse on her ex-husband's face and did not understand what made him behave so calmly. It got dark outside, and the lady suggested ending the negotiations and continuing tomorrow. At this moment, the second prince suddenly stood up from his seat, which caused surprise even among his companions. Marquis Arata cast an angry glance at the young man. Agatha tried to find out from her husband the reason for His Highness's exemplary behavior, but the guy only replied that he had sorted everything out yesterday. The girl admitted that she did not expect that settled meant exactly this decision. Enoch asked if he had managed to help his wife. The heroine replied that it helped a lot. The newlyweds held hands. When the most problematic participant in the negotiations, the second prince of Manukor, unexpectedly came to an agreement. An agreement was quickly reached, and the parties signed the treaty. The Nobilis family received enormous port dues, as well as rent for the buildings and control of the new trading hub. The Minukar Empire limited itself to a moderate fee for the use of sea routes, but received the right of priority use of the future trade corridor. In any case, the winner of this agreement was the Nobilis family. Having completed the entire program and spent their honeymoon, the couple returned to the capital of Roxbad. My lord and my lady entered arm in arm into the first residence of the Nobilis. Agatha reminded that tomorrow the couple has another day off. It was clear from the girl's face that she had some kind of plan. The young people went to Lady Salette's studio, where they were met by the owner herself. The main character was glad that the lady had let all the clients go for today, but still noted that it wasn't worth the effort. Salette replied that she could not have greeted such a distinguished guest in any other way. The couple entered a cozy hall filled with examples of beautiful costumes. The owner of the atelier heard about the successful conclusion of the negotiations and asked if Agatha was choosing a dress for the lavish ball organized for the occasion by the emperor. The marquise was again surprised by the speed with which the news spread. Lady Salette invited the girl to look at the most popular fabrics of the time. Having seen the samples, the heroine was puzzled. At this time of year, fresher and lighter colors were usually in fashion. Agatha cautiously inquired whether anything unusual had happened in the capital during her absence. The designer replied that this color is indeed a bit heavy. The new product just arrived today from the Nuta trading house. After these words, my lady immediately understood what was going on. It became clear that the ladies of the Nuta house would soon return to high society. The girl remembered that the samples exactly matched the tastes of the former Duchess Nuta. Agatha noticed that the fabric was luxurious, but it was still not suitable for a young aristocrat. The girl pointed a thin-gloved finger at the soft pink sample. The heroine asked her husband's opinion, and he agreed with her choice. The lady suggested taking this pink fabric to start with. She also tried on the young man other samples of fabric that would go well with the first one. Enoch was a little tired of the choice of cloth for suits. He picked up another pastel-colored piece from the table. The guy noticed that this color would also suit my lady perfectly. Agatha was a little surprised by her husband's attention to tailoring suits. The girl suggested that she match her suit and the marquise's tie to the same color, and the young man agreed. The lady asked the owner of the studio to bring a sketch. The main character appeared before her husband in a dazzling dress. The guy's face reflected amazement. Lady Salette's assistants could not stop admiring their creation, which suited the young marquise so well. Agatha was very pleased that she and her husband would appear in matching outfits at the palace ball. Enoch suggested that the girl add a shawl or cape to her outfit. The lady did not understand why he suddenly had such an idea. The marquise explained that he was worried that his wife would freeze, even though it was summer. The young man added that the ball would take place at night, and the heroine became thoughtful. The marquise, with a sweet smile, assured the guy that she would only be indoors and everything would be fine. The young man resigned himself to the girl's desire. An urgent dispatch arrived from the palace last night. The Arata couple learned that the ruler of the empire was summoning them, and that was how their vacation ended. Enoch clarified whether the audience was definitely scheduled for noon. The man promised to pick up the main character after the audience ended, so they could have lunch together. Agatha promised to send a dispatch immediately after she was free. While preparing for the reception, the girl reflected on how she and the marquise had become much closer recently. The newlyweds still shared one room and always dined together, despite their work. Every day brought the lady a lot of happiness. The heroine thanked the maids for their efforts in creating her beautiful image. Agatha got into the carriage and slowly headed towards the palace. The girl approached the doors of the reception hall, and the knights bowed their heads before her in respect. The emperor was already impatiently awaiting his goddaughter. The ruler invited my lady to sit down at a small table on which a tea set was laid out. At first, Formili and Agatha were silent. Finally, the emperor cleared his throat and said that he had heard about the rudeness that Prince Menokora had allowed himself to express towards the girl. The marquise calmly confirmed his remark. The ruler thought, his face tense, Agatha noticed that her godfather was frankly embarrassed in her presence. With the meeting of the delegations, Vormilai wanted to smooth over long-standing disagreements and show that relations between the two empires had been restored. No one could have imagined that someone would burst into the bedroom of a noble lady without any permission. As soon as the main character remembered this situation, she became angry again. The emperor reminded that he was organizing a lavish ball to mark the successful completion of the negotiations. His Majesty's mercy was boundless, but Agatha could not stop being angry with him. The ruler of the empire felt partly guilty for what happened in the castle of Pahlavi, because it was he who insisted on his goddaughter's participation in the negotiations. Vormilai promised to reward the main character with 500,000 gold, in addition to the 5,000 granted in honor of the marriage. The girl said that she planned to give the money as a reward to the knights who accompanied her. The emperor was touched by the lady's concern for others. The ruler said that today he had seated Marquise Arata, who was attending the meeting for the first time, in a place of honor in the front row. Agatha asked if her husband was sitting in the front row at the edge, but Vormilai hotly objected that he had assigned the milord a place in the very center. The lady thought that, given Enoch's current position, he was entitled to sit in the front row, but it was important that the emperor himself had given him a seat in the center. His Majesty added that when discussing every issue, he asked the Marquise's opinion, so his position at court undoubtedly increased. In addition, the ruler offered to grant the war hero benefits on his current possessions. Agatha noticed that the emperor was forgetting one thing. The girl felt uncomfortable talking about this, but circumstances required it. Milady asked whether the ruler would send her to similar negotiations next time. The godfather's answer was almost obvious to the heroine. The Marquise noted that since an informal agreement had been reached on Pahlavi, the Mainukar Empire should send an official delegation this fall. This was necessary in order to officially announce the treaty and strengthen relations between the two empires. The emperor replied that the Mainukars would expect Lady Nobilis to come to them for negotiations. Agatha really didn't want to run into her unbearable ex-husband again. The ruler understood the girl's feelings and asked her to at least come to the ball in honor of the delegation. Otherwise, Mainukar would misunderstand her absence. The lady agreed, but on the condition that her husband would come with her. The emperor noticed that his goddaughter had a strong character and that even a ruler could make a mistake once. The lady thought angrily, "What if the godfather makes a mistake a second time?" The heroine said out loud that if His Majesty had given her a list of delegates in advance, it would not have come to this. Agatha was still angry at the ruler of the empire. The ruler admitted his mistake and asked to leave everything as it was. The girl said that she really liked the island of Pahlavi. The emperor suggested having lunch together so that his godmother could tell him more about her impressions. The main character had already made a promise to dine with Enoch, but it was necessary to maintain propriety. The lady asked if her husband could join them for dinner, as he would have much more to tell. Vormilai agreed that the Marquis's view on military matters was still the best. That day, the dinner lasted for 3 whole hours, and as a result, the position of my lord at court was further elevated. A month later, a magnificent ball was held in the palace. When the Arata couple entered the hall, all the guests turned towards them in amazement. The outfits were perfectly chosen, and the young people looked like a perfect couple. The ladies of the court joyfully greeted Agatha. The girl was also glad to meet her friends. But then the arrival of Crown Prince Roxbad was announced. Anthony appeared before his sister and her husband in all his glory. All those present bowed ceremoniously to the prince, who expressed his joy at the meeting. The heir began to ask Agatha about her honeymoon and rumors about the newlyweds' family happiness. The ladies modestly withdrew. The prince admitted that, although he was the empire's main ladies' man, he had come alone today, but the lady decided that he had done so to tease her. The Marquise noticed that the brother and sister still had a strong family bond. The main character was still interested in why Anthony came alone. The heir replied that the imperial ball was a rare event, and he had come to show everyone his warm relationship with the only heir of the House of Nobilis and her husband. Agatha replied to her brother that, as the only legitimate son of His Majesty, he could speak. Besides, the prince suspected that something interesting would happen at the ball. Enoch asked if Anthony was hinting at Duke Theodore Newt. It became clear to the heir that the spouses already knew everything. Covering her face with a fan, Milady asked how it was possible not to know. Today, the heroine noticed that someone's intense gaze was particularly persistent. The Marquise could still tolerate this from others, but she couldn't understand why Theodore didn't look away. Agatha was worried that her husband might misunderstand something. The meeting was unavoidable, and the girl decided to take advantage of the opportunity by asking her husband if it was possible to call the Duke to them for a minute. The guy had nothing against it. The young man approached and respectfully greeted the Crown Prince. Anthony inquired about the health of Duke Nuta, who thanked him for his concern. The main character didn't really want to talk to her ex-husband, but it was necessary. The lady was the first to greet Theodore. The young man said that he was glad to see the young Marquise again. Newt said he had a few words for the prince's cousin. Enoch put his arm around his wife's shoulders and asked if he could hear it too. The Duke asked both the Marquise and His Highness to stay. It became clear to Anthony that Theodore still held his ex-wife in high regard. The young man said that now that Agatha had become a stranger, he had no right to bring danger upon her. The embarrassed young man asked that the very fact of his visit be accepted as a kind of apology. The newlyweds became wary when they heard the Duke's words. Theodore announced that he had come to warn the Aratus couple. Some time ago, a conversation arose between his sister, mother, and grandmother about the young Marquise. Nothing good was expected from this conversation for the main character, but Duke Newt did not hear the details. The young man asked the lady to beware of his family and those aristocrats who were close to him. Finally, Theodore said that he wanted peace for his ex-wife, wherever they were. Agatha thought it was ironic that the man who always gave in to his family stood up for the girl only after divorcing her. But it is unlikely that this will cause the current husband to misunderstand the lady. The Marquis asked if everything was all right with his wife, and she answered in the affirmative. The heroine explained that she was simply surprised by the Duke's strange behavior. The lady already understood that if the Nuta ladies returned to society this autumn, it would not mean anything good. The girl tried to assure Enoch that in the new season, everything could be resolved peacefully. At this time, the arrival of the son of the Roxbad Empire, His Majesty the Emperor, was announced. The prince said that he had to go. The young people agreed to meet later. While dancing, Agatha could not stop worrying whether the Marquis was affected by what had happened to Duke Newt. The heroine decided to ask directly whether her husband had been uncomfortable with the conversation with the Duke, and he replied that there were apparently good reasons for this dialogue. The girl said that she spoke to her ex-husband for the first time since the divorce, and her husband replied that he understood that the conversation did not happen at the lady's will. My lord held Agatha's hand tenderly in his. The young man said that he understood everything, but there was still little pleasant about it. The Marquise wanted to know the real reason why the boy was upset. The girl wanted to believe that all this was because Enoch cared about her. The emperor asked Marquis Arata to come to his table. The boy was intrigued by what His Majesty wanted from him. My lord put his jacket on my lady's shoulders so that she would not freeze. Approaching the table, the guy bowed low to the ruler. The main character wondered how long her godfather would keep her husband near him. The emperor ordered the young man to sit down at the table in an empty place. Agatha realized that the conversation would not end soon. The lady thought that since the emperor's favorite marquise had appeared, they wouldn't let him go so easily. The girl decided that it was time for her to take action little by little. Looking over his shoulder, the young man noticed his wife heading off somewhere. The guy felt a little sad that he was separated from his lady. Agatha sat down at the table with the noble ladies. The lady turned to her neighbor, Mrs. Iris. The heroine said that they should take a closer look at Newt's house. Iris suggested, checking out their close associates. The Marquise understood that the battlefield would not be the court, but high society, since the Nutas also did not want open war. Because of this, it is much more likely that aristocrats will take advantage of families preparing to debut or other neutral people. Agatha had instructed Lady Iris to keep an eye on such families and had great confidence in her. Enoch was still chatting at his desk and doing an excellent job. Feeling her gaze, the man also looked at my lady. The girl was embarrassed when she met her husband's gaze. The young man thought that recently, the main character had simply left without looking back, and now she was secretly watching him. At that moment, another lady approached the Marquise, rustling in her lush dress. The girl asked to give her a little time, because she had something to talk to my lord about. The guy's face became gloomy and focused. Agatha noticed the lady approaching her husband and began to listen to the ladies more absent-mindedly. Lady Iris reported that this girl was Lady Lucy, daughter of Count Lyris. Lucy was once engaged to the Marquis, but when he was sent to the front, the girl's father announced the break in the engagement. Milady Arata was not pleased that this special person was coming to her husband. The girl was interested in the reason for this visit. Agatha wanted to approach the couple who were talking, but Iris warned that this could cause unpleasant rumors. The lady thought she could survive a little gossip. Meanwhile, Enoch agreed to listen to his ex-fiancée. Lucy first of all congratulated the Marquis on his victory, since she did not dare to approach him at the victory reception, but was amazed by his military merits. The young man understood that if his wife saw this, she would be upset. Looking at the table of noble ladies, the guy noticed that Agatha had left her seat. The young man realized that something serious was coming. It was clear that the Marquise was heading towards her husband's table. As the main character was climbing the steps, Lady Larasa announced that her father wanted to apologize for his previous rudeness and asked my lord to spare him a little time. As Lucy was asking for permission to meet her father, Agatha appeared behind her. The girl put her hand on the young man's shoulder. Milady asked who this lady was, whom she had not met before. Lady Lucy timidly apologized for her intrusion. The girl introduced herself and said that her father had asked her to express her respects to the Marquis of Arata as a sign of past connections. The main character asked with a smile what connected Lucy with her husband. This question made the young girl embarrassed and blush. Enoch announced that he had been engaged to Lyris's daughter 10 years ago, and when the boy's parents died and he went off to war, he was told that the engagement was broken. The young man added that these were matters of bygone days, and now they had nothing to do with him. Milady said she had heard some rumors about this event. The girl understood that Count Lyris, who had once rejected young Arata, now saw him as a conquering hero and, out of fear, sent his daughter to spy. Since things had come to this, the heroine decided to respond to the insult inflicted on her husband. The lady said that she now saw how cold the relationship between Lucy and Enoch had been, and did not understand why the current conversation had been started. Agatha asked if the girl really thought the Marquise would forgive the disrespect shown to him by the Lyris family 10 years ago. Milady advised the young lady to return home and learn prudence, since, according to etiquette, the head of the family should apologize. The disgraced Lady Lucy withdrew silently. Enoch asked if the heroine was very affected by this incident. The young man was very upset. Agatha asked if she could speak frankly. Fragments of memories of the couple sharing a bedroom surfaced in the girl's memory. The newlyweds had a common schedule. They even wore matching outfits. There was a subtle tension between Enoch and Agatha, but she didn't want to burden her husband by bringing up the subject. The lady said she had come only because there had been no news from the Marquis, although he had promised to be away only for a minute. At that moment, the emperor approached the couple, and the main character apologized for the commotion she had caused. But the ruler replied that Count Lyris was to blame for sending his daughter away instead of coming to apologize himself. Agatha said with a smile that in that case she would return to her place. Enoch looked sadly at his wife leaving. The young man understood that the lady was not in a good mood. Returning to the ladies, the lady asked if word of the incident would spread quickly. Ms. Iris replied that the event would undoubtedly attract attention, but in the current situation, the main character's intervention would not seem strange. Lady Iris and Madame Chalet promised to keep everything under full control to make sure nothing happened. A servant approached the aristocrats and addressed the Marquise. The boy reported that Lord Arata had overindulged in wine and wanted to return home early. Meanwhile, Enoch asked permission to take his leave. The couple got into the carriage and headed home. It was deep night outside, and the lanterns were lit in the carriage. The young people looked out the window in silence. Agatha looked more thoughtful than usual. The Marquis was worried by the prolonged silence. He decided to ask directly whether Lady Lyris's appearance had upset his wife. The girl felt a little uncomfortable, but she replied that it was not about this person. The problem was that the heroine once again had to face the wall between them, called a fictitious marriage. This collision was painful for the lady. Enoch said he understood that it wasn't Lucy's fault. The young man asked what the reason was then. The guy was confused because his wife looked so upset. Agatha asked why the Marquis thought she was upset. The young man didn't know what to answer. My lord assumed that the girl was disappointed that he had a past. The heroine replied that this was not so, while simultaneously recalling her 6 divorces. The boy asked if the reason for the Marquise's sadness was connected with him. Milady hesitated, not knowing what to say. Enoch's fingers gently touched his wife's chin. The guy asked the girl not to avoid his gaze. Agatha looked at him with her big, beautiful eyes. The young man asked again what was weighing on the heart of his chosen one. Until now, he had respected his wife impeccably. He was gentle and careful with the girl, protected from dangers, sometimes even excessively. He saved her honor from her ex-husband's attacks. Agatha wondered what would happen if she wanted more. The girl said that she wanted to please Enoch as much as she liked him.